the number and I forgot it. Live chat number 4 through Happy Dragons, Roy, Wellspring Herps, and myself, Savannah, Perfect Hugh. And today we have Amaryllis Bekk from, uh, I'm so sorry if I say this wrong, Folkvang Exotics.
You got it.
Good, perfect. Amaryllis did a wonderful podcast a couple hours ago on understanding skink body language, and actually, I think I learned quite a bit. A lot of new terms and things that I never would have really observed otherwise, but now I'm going to look for because I don't keep blue tongue skinks, but I have other skinks, other lizards. So I'm interested to see like I think a lot of it would be shared, but to what degree would be really
Similarities.
interesting. So just real quick, we'll talk about Happy Dragons. It's a reptile first, ethics driven care platform. Right now, we are mainly operating on Discord. Hopefully, that changes in the near future. But we want to bring relevant, advancing all information from all perspectives, but most importantly, science based information that helps decide how we care for our reptiles with the reptiles in mind, whether that's giving them proper enclosures, temperatures, parameters, food, anything. We want to help everyone in any ways we can. Our team is quite quickly evolving and expanding, and I love it. So, like, if anyone ever has recommendations of saying, like, hey, this person has a true passion for this species, I would love to talk to that person. So, they should definitely leave us a suggestion. And they can join the Discord server where they can leave said suggestion, or they can look any of us up on Instagram, whatever works best. So, Amaryllis, I do have the big question for you, if you guys
Yep.
don't mind me starting with. Would you say blue tongue skinks are it for you? Like that was like something you saw and you were just like, I love it, or is that something you kept and then fell in love with it?
I like
Yeah.
this question.
Funnily enough, um, I didn't like really start getting into reptiles until my senior year of high school because I had to babysit my brother's girlfriend's snake because they were on vacation or whatever. So I really fell in love with reptiles like completely after that. And from there, I just kind of fell down a rabbit hole of reptiles. But when I was first just researching the different types of reptiles that people could have, it's kind of funny because one of the first photos of a blue tongue skink I saw, I just like immediately fell in love with it. And I'm like, that looks like a dragon. That's really cool. Because growing up, I was very artistic. So I would draw a lot of dragons and creatures and dinosaur based stuff. So that was like my huge thing was drawing growing up, drawing fantasy. So my brain immediately clocked on to, oh, that's a dragon. That's really cool. And it has a blue tongue. That's unique. But I didn't get my first blue tongue until 2 years later. His name was Stitch, and he was a severely malnourished Indonesian blue tongue skink. He
Oh,
was a sarong locality. Funny enough, the sarong being my first blue tongue. Um, Unfortunately, he was really sick. He had really severe mites, some of the worst malnourishment I've ever seen, external parasites, just list goes on of problems. So unfortunately, we were unable to save him. He was too far along. But that was the time that I really clicked that I don't want this to happen anymore. I want to see what I can do to improve the lives of wild caught reptiles and reptiles that have to go through this process of everything and see what I can do about improving their lives. So I first started with, and after that, I first started with an interest in reptile rescue. So occasionally I would assist our local reptile rescue, and I still do, Pacific Northwest Aquatics and Exotics. So I currently assist them with transport as needed because big state. But after that, I decided I couldn't do the pet based rescue work. So from there, I managed to turn on to wild caught species. And first, I started with Peter's banded skinks. And this was before I ever got another blue tongue. So first, I started with Peter's banded skinks. And then I really started to work on rehabilitating those because those guys are 100% wild caught, as
Mm-hmm.
well as a majority of Indonesian blue tongues. So I really got focused on rehabilitating wild caught reptiles. And then I was able to get my first long term blue tongue skink. His name's Hades. He's a Moroccan. We got him in 2020, if I'm remembering correctly. And he just really started it all for me after that for blue tongues, because that's when I started talking about how when I started talking to other breeders about how much they're being produced, who's producing them, and there were, when I first really started looking into it, there were less than 10 successful breeders that were active at the time in the United States alone. So it really was just this crazy roller coaster. Yet I started with the blue tongue skink being one of the first reptiles I fell in love with before I was even really into reptiles. Yeah, there really is just no straight answer. It's just a lot of everything.
So you really tackled that
That's
at the core then.
Hmm.
That's that's 0 to 100 passion. Like
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people would be in that situation, and they'd be like never again. Like that's how I was kind of like with birds. Like I had a really bad
mm,
experience. Um,
Hmm.
would you? I do have just a like small question that doesn't matter, but do you use the term, or would you view the term rehabilitation and acclimation interchangeably, or like was it like trust and truly all like, because I'm sure you have far more experience with wild caught animals than I do.
Hmm.
Like is the state they genuinely come in, like even legal imports, like is it really bad? Because I've only seen like the smuggled animals where it's really bad.
Yeah, sometimes you'd be surprised. There are wild caught animals that are legally imported that are just in absolutely horrible shape. Um, the primary issue with that is once they're imported, once they're exported from their initial countries, their immune systems crash and the stress increases. So, overall, all the health issues are much more likely to manifest, or it's much easier for them to catch things. So, if exporters or wholesalers or importers aren't properly housing the animals,
Oh,
it just makes it significantly worse.
yeah, and it's
It
the
makes it go
revolving
from zero
doors
to
of
10.
animals.
So that's why a lot of the retail websites, companies have pretty bad reputation is due to the fact that they don't properly quarantine and house their
right.
wild caught reptiles. It's for them it's just nothing but money. Unfortunately, that's just from my observations with what we've seen. So when it comes to rehabilitating, those are the ones that I would consider they're really struggling. They need to be in captivity for at least a few months. They need medical care, they need TLC, or even if it's just they're severely anorexic, something is causing such severe stress on them that they're really struggling to eat. Acclimation, I would aim more towards healthier animals personally. When it comes to acclimation, I personally think of helping a wild caught animal adjust to life in captivity because it can be rather difficult for them. It's incredibly stressful. They're not typically used to it, and there's many different species that just simply don't thrive in captivity no matter what you do because of the specific care they require, the stress, the health issues. It can be a lot to juggle for sure. But I'd consider rehabilitation more medical cases, while acclimation
Mm-hmm.
more of a mental state, I guess. Like working with their mental state and how they just adjust overall.
I don't know if that's better or worse than what I had imagined, because maybe I kind of played like devil's advocate a little bit, like because obviously I know like the really big companies that have less than stellar reputations and they work with wild caught imports, but I always in a way kind of hoped that it was maybe just because people see a cheap animal that they really like and they get it, and they're just not prepared for handling an import.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually never kind of dawned on me.
Mm.
Yeah,
Just
because
that,
I went directly to the source, directly to the importers, the wholesalers, because I wanted as fresh as possible. That way, they had the highest chances of survival.
right, I've heard that before too. Yeah, I've considered that. Like I've even considered that in a way with like a Bronia. Like I think at the point I'm at now, especially now that imports are coming in, I don't think I could ever ethically like get a new one from someone that doesn't have papers now that we know it's absolutely possible. Even before then, like once I came to the realization that the animals aren't supposed to be here, that was kind of like it for me, and that's when I decided to do the imports. But
Mm-hmm.
even like long-term captives or people that have had the abronias for like let's say 7 years, like I'm still now very iffy to even get an animal from them because I just like if I can't fully account for the care or the care prior to theirs or anything like that, like it's kind of scary. So
That's perfectly reasonable. Slightly off topic of animals, that's actually pretty common in the hognose community. The hognose community is very,
Mm-hmm.
very tight about their quarantine procedures, how clean and sterile they keep everything. There's even some breeders that won't handle their hognoses unless they're wearing a fresh set of rubber gloves. Like there's apparently a lot of issues with crypto within
Yeah,
hognoses,
crypto's
unfortunately.
really common with hognose. Yep.
I didn't even know that.
Yep.
Incredibly common. I mean, there was even a whole scandal recently about it.
Ray,
But
do you have a protocol for like when you go like and relocate animals or take them in? Like, do you what is your like quarantine like? Even if you don't take the animal like back to your place,
Mm-hmm.
even temporarily or permanently, like, what do you have to worry about stuff like that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, with like relocation calls, I like sterilize all of my equipment in between snakes, and a lot of that is because of just like potential pathogen transmission between snakes, especially now with like the emergence of snake fungal disease.
that's a
Um,
big
that's
issue
like
here.
a big issue, and so I'm trying to be conscientious and not potentially spread anything that could be on my tools or equipment. And then yeah, for like rehabilitation stuff at home, I just keep everything separate. Keep all my anything new is quarantined, usually in my other shed. Like I have a section of my tool shed basically that I just have reserved for anything that new coming in. And depending on where it's coming from, the quarantine period can vary, but usually it's a minimum of 90 days. Um, and I've had quarantines go way longer than that, especially with wild caught stuff. Although to be honest, I think that like I have just as much, if not more, concern for stuff coming from captive collections, captive bred collections. Um,
Well,
just
it's more
because
animals
there's
coming into
so
contact
many.
with another, right?
Hmm.
Very often, yeah, and it's just like there are just as many issues in long-term captive collections, like with things like crypto is a great example, where it can be kind of latent or dormant, some at least in terms of symptoms in a collection for a really long time, and then everything can go symptomatic and you can lose your whole collection pretty quickly from it. So the other thing too is that at this point, like I'm not really in an acquisition stage in this particular moment. Like there's a couple species that I'd love to work with down the road at some point, but they're so like obscure and weird that I'll probably never even see them. So um, I kind of just don't really have an open collection anymore.
That's
But
fair. Well,
yeah.
then you two seem like the perfect people to ask this because I am not. I do quarantine my animals, but for saying it's a quarantine period is honestly quite liberal. Like it's like they're in another room. They
Mm-hmm.
like if I do like when I initially handle animals when I'm doing that initial check over, like I'm wearing gloves and then I still wash my hands and put them into a bare minimum enclosure so I can watch them. And usually, if I can, if there's reason for concern, I generally like to take them to the vet to get that trip over and done with because I trust my vet's opinion
Mm-hmm.
for anything I might miss. But
Yeah,
Um,
you have one of the best vets in the country for
he's great.
reptiles.
Um, but the question for you too is like, how do you determine how long your quarantine period is? Because I know people that have strict, like impressively crazy biosecurity, like to the point
Hmm.
where most people would probably like laugh at them, but it's like they get the last laugh, honestly. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like how do you determine how long like your quarantine period is or whether it needs to be extended?
So for me, it's like I said, a minimum of 90 days is where I start. And that's like if the animal appears healthy outwardly, is in good shape. 90 days. I do a round of fecals. Occasionally, it depends on the what I'm bringing in, but if there's like a species that commonly would have a certain virus, potentially I would test for that. So, like in the case of Xenosaurus, which I used to keep, I tested those for paramyxovirus because it's really common for those to have paramyxovirus. So I did a round of tests, two different rounds of those, and made sure I got all negative results before again moving them into like my general herp room. But also, like, say I have some things in quarantine, if I then get other animals that are then going into that same quarantine, then the quarantine period starts over for everything in that area.
Yeah, that kind of
Um,
makes sense.
so
Oh,
that's the thing. But like I said, that's a minimum. I have had like Polychris that I've brought in that were wild caught. With the Polychris marmoratus that I've kept, I've had those in quarantine for like 9 months before because um, they just weren't at the point where I felt like they were like outwardly healthy and like solid. That's like what I'm looking for. It's especially again, like I said, with wild caught stuff. But yeah, that's what I like to do. But I mean, honestly, what my original design for my current herp setup was to have several different like sheds, and one of them was just going to be quarantine. Like it was going to be this like a smaller shed, a fully separate building, and it was going to be very sterile, basically. Like not necessarily the setups totally sterile, but like the room very sterile. Um, so anyway, just something I've done there, but it can vary, and I think that like quarantine is one of those things. It's really hard to do it right unless you have like a lot of space, and if you have like I said, like a separate room or separate building, it's just
yeah,
really hard to do it like by like the way that everyone says like you should do quarantine this way. It's like very few people can actually realistically do that.
right.
So
It's like they start with saying, "Put them in your basement." And you're like, "I don't have a basement." And they're
Savannah, just one real quick before Amaryllis, you give your answer. Dean is tuning in. Thanks for being here, Dean, and mentioned that the volume is a little low. So if you can boost the volume with your producer powers, I don't know if that's possible, but
I mean, everyone's
um,
volume's all the way up. You're a little quiet, but Amaryllis seems
maybe it's
fine.
just
I
because I'm too quiet. Let's see if my language. Maybe this is a little better. I don't know.
mm,
Okay, Amaryllis. Quarantine.
So for me, I guess I'll just go over what I do for my acclimation. So when I was doing this, I particularly preferred to buy groups of specific species. So that way I would just have one large group, typically between 10 and 20 animals, that I can just purely focus on. And I can make sure that they are all healthy, eating, drinking, defecating normally. For me, it's much more important, as long as there's no health issues, I typically just do that bare minimum paper towel substrate until I get the first stool that I can appropriately check for parasites. And then after that, I prioritize their own well being and safety in terms of their mental states. So I do prefer to have a proper enclosure setup rather than a more empty, quarantine, sterile setup.
mm,
The reason why I did this is a good example is with the Peters banded skinks. They spend a large majority of their time under the substrate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even how they bask, is they heat up their bodies by absorbing the heat in the sand around them. They don't commonly bask. They can, and they do sometimes, but it's much more likely for them to just absorb the substrate around them. They tend to be very shy as well, no matter what you do, who's there, what's going on, they tend to be a bit more shy. So if you had those Peter's banded skinks in a more sterile setup for that observation period, I found that those animals actually declined and got sicker or significantly struggled with anorexia. No matter what I did, even if I had done probiotics to improve their gut biomes, we've had testing done to ensure there's no actual health issues. I've triple checked their husbandry. As long as if they didn't have like proper substrate and places to hide, they simply would not eat, wouldn't be active, and would just significantly decline. So as soon as we put them in a proper enclosure, the only difference being the decor and the substrate, suddenly we had much more success getting them used to captivity and eating. And anorexia is one of the biggest issues we struggled with. So getting them to eat is absolutely huge. And we had that success with that proper enclosure. So having that type of, proper setup can be difficult with quarantine, especially if they are sick. But like even if Indonesian blue tongue skinks, even if they have a respiratory infection, so folks recommend they go on paper towel substrate. I advise completely against that because more often than not, respiratory infections come from an improper environment. So maintaining a proper environment is key to ensuring that they recover and that they don't worsen compared to putting them in something that's a lot harder to maintain, not as normal, even if they are on medications. If the environment's still wonky, there's not really going to be a better recovery rate. So that's where it gets difficult, really, is if health issues come involved. But I do tend to stick to more normal enclosures that I then go for. I also do a 90-day quarantine period minimum. If there's health issues involved, difficulty shedding, appetite issues, or even if they're just a little bit more, like they have behavioral issues where they're a lot more shy or they're hiding more, and I just don't feel comfortable sending them off to a new home for whatever reason, I will extend that quarantine period. And again, since I only work in those groups, I don't have to worry about bringing something new in and refreshing that. Because I am lucky enough to have my own facility where I can have my own little separate quarantine areas and just separate my entire collection. So that is something I am grateful for and able to do. But if it comes to anybody getting a fresh wild caught species, I would recommend going on to just that basic simple substrate, paper towel or newspaper. I believe my veterinarians have told me that they prefer paper towel, just to get that first stool, to get that tested, then get them onto a proper environment, and then after a 90-day period, clean everything, refresh everything, and then you basically got everything else set up finally once you reset the quarantine enclosure into a permanent enclosure, or you move them from a quarantine enclosure to a permanent enclosure.
That makes sense. I'm not making excuses for myself, but I think part of why like my quarantine periods are on the shorter side is because I want to it's anyone who knows me knows I worked really hard on the enclosure for the animal. So I get really excited, and patience is a virtue. But
Mm-hmm.
I want the animal to get comfortable in its environment so it can establish like where it feels safe. And so that I mean that makes perfect sense to me, especially like you said with the sand and the petered bandits. I've heard that they're pretty uh I don't know, would you say they're fragile, or is that just
I
a
wouldn't say
blanket
they're
term for
fragile.
imports?
It's typically they're just fragile when they're imported. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's quite a few species. Like another species I really work with extensively is the Laolepis, the butterfly agamas, And it's when they're imported is really when they tend to crash really easily, and it's difficult to get them acclimated or even rehabilitated if they are sick, because
Hmm.
they they are very impacted by stress. But once they are acclimated, they're eating consistently, there's no actual like problems, they tend to be incredibly hardy. Like, it's really odd how extreme ends they go from being fragile to being incredibly hardy. But there's still some species that are still fragile. But yeah, the Peters are really an odd one.
Roy, is it the same like with the snakes? I know you have some of like your ambassador rattlesnakes. Like, did it take a while for
Hmm.
them to adjust or?
No, I mean honestly, they've all been pretty sturdy. Rattlesnakes are, at least this species that I'm in contact with, is it's northern Pacific rattlesnake, Crotalus oregonus. And they're pretty hardy snakes. They're pretty tough because, and I think part of that is just that like they have a huge range. So they're from like Central California all the way up into British Columbia. So typically, when you have a species that has a big range like that, they have pretty wide tolerances and latitude, if that makes sense. Um, and so I haven't really had a lot of issues. Typically, they all eat well. They all kind of rebound pretty well. Um, and again, I mean, honestly, like these couple that I have, like they could probably be released, but like I've just had them so long at this point that I don't I don't think it's the best thing to do. I think once something's been in captivity for 6 months to a year, it's kind of a long time to then go and do a release.
Quality
Um,
of life.
yeah, but I love them. They're great snakes to have around. They're very beautiful, very interesting creatures. So
They are beautiful.
I'm
I
happy to
keep
have a couple of them around.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
lucky. I admire you. I keep finding myself in either one of two situations. Animals that I really like and would love to work
Hmm.
with are either very vulnerable and highly trafficked, or
Yeah.
I should not touch them. Like, it's one of the
Yeah.
two.
Honestly, same.
That's yeah, that's relatable for a lot of the stuff I like too, honestly. But um Zano, you want to tell us a little bit about what's behind you? I know that
Oh man.
you've been pretty
You mean the
excited
elephant in
about
the
this. This has
room?
been eagerly anticipated for quite a while,
Oh
and
yeah.
love to hear about this
Yeah, this is
new enclosure.
Yeah, these are my time sinks right now. I actually set these up pretty quick, but it
Uh-huh.
felt like forever, and I've got three more to do. So there's a total of eight
Nice.
enclosures. So I think
Amazing.
I'm more upset about it because I completely destroyed my hands, like working with like trying to work in them, because I got a pair of like work gloves and they're too big, so I guess I have small hands. But
Like,
yeah, so I definitely now I'm glad you brought that up because I need to like pick your brains, your creative brains. I don't know if you guys have made a lot of backgrounds or anything, or worked with a lot of
Mm.
expanding foam. One thing in particular is I would like to know what is the best way to carve in very tight spaces when
Mm.
making backgrounds, because usually I like to use my fingers because I like the shape it leaves, and I can get
Mm-hmm.
in the nooks and crannies, the benefit of having small hands.
Mm-hmm.
But
a
yeah,
hot
I completely destroy my hands when I brush up against the cork, and I'm covered in
Mm-hmm.
foam. I usually wear gloves when I apply the foam, but when I start carving it, sometimes, I said I was impatient. It's not fully
Yeah,
cured,
yeah.
so I peel away
Yep.
and then I get all over my hands. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I recommend a hot knife, honestly.
Mm.
you think
They're
so?
definitely worth the. I
I
bring
like
it
the
to you.
jagged edges though.
Well, it's just the hot knife is just for the base to really help you kind of get the base shape you want,
Mm,
and
Mm-hmm.
then you add the texture on top of that.
yeah. For me, the base shape is the cork. So it's mainly what's in between it. Like when it bubbles up, I don't
Yeah.
like the bubbles, so I rip it out literally with my hands.
Hmm.
But like in the tight spaces in between the corks, because I need to also like sometimes when I rip away pieces, I'll find openings, and I have to like find those openings and make sure I close them off, whether with more foam or inserts or whatever. But yeah, it's like I get really hands on. But I've looked at like um only one time did I make like an arid background 3D. Well, not one time.
Mm,
One instance where I made two backgrounds out of like the insulation foam, and I carved and sanded the hell out of them. Looked totally awesome. I suck at painting, so then it looked horrible, and and then it was just really noisy when my animals were like running up all over it. But
mm,
yeah, but people I see people ask a lot too, like how to make like backgrounds. I've read guides. I've seen people build enclosures that put mine to shame. I'm not a super creative person. Like when I was younger, I used to draw a lot too, like dragons, horses, whatever. Animals, loved it. Like, if I was in high school, I was sketching something off Google. But
Absolutely.
yeah, but but I'm not very creative outside of that. I'm a very follow the rules type person. So like when it comes to making terrariums, like I kind of have like a feng shui that looks right. Like a branch needs to go a specific direction or
yeah.
whatever. But outside of that, like I'm not terribly crafty. Like some of the things some people create, uh, especially like what you're describing, like with the hot knives too. Like watching them, or the people who like I see now people are like paving enclosures. I don't know if paving is the right way. They're like sculpting it with like the little shovels. Like they're applying the paste and like
Oh, so yeah. I know some people will use like those actual foam squares,
hmm
glue those, silicone those, whatever, and just get them set up. And then they will use like grout. There's multiple
yeah.
different types of grout. I know
There's that.
Drylock is commonly recommended, and Zoopoxy is another one.
That's the one that I think that Savannah's talking about, the Zoopoxy, which you could. It's like almost like people sculpt it, almost like
hmm
clay, kind of.
Yeah.
Yep,
Um,
yep.
I would
That's
love
and
to use
exactly it.
yeah, I
I
Zoopoxy.
use
I haven't honestly done any of these. I've all the backgrounds I've done, I've used like Universal Rocks products, and I've used spray foam to adhere the products, but I usually get like Universal Rocks has this one thing called like versatile flat sheets, and it's basically just a flat roll,
I
and then I
have some of
get some
those.
of their
Yeah.
ledges, and then I spray foam their use the spray foam as a glue to glue ledges on,
kind of DIY
so I
your
can
own.
kind of customize it, and I kind of DIY my own. Or I'll do that with a combination of like their other backgrounds. And the only reason why I've done that is just like Universal Rocks is expensive, but like the product is super durable, and it's really like it's waterproof and um, lasts forever. And so that's why I've done that in the past. But I would like to try some of these other methods. I don't know if I want to do the spray foam method, just because for the reasons that you've described, Savannah, I don't love spray
It's
foam.
so messy and it
It's so
is a lot
messy.
of work. But on the plus side is
Yeah,
you end up with something
it does look
completely
nice.
unique.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
Um,
I
Yeah,
personally want to stick with the Zoopoxy for
yeah,
ours. Like I was talking to Savannah earlier about how we wanted to build our own enclosures for our blue tongues. So because
nice.
the blueies are all terrestrial, um, they're not very good at climbing, but they certainly try. So they will try to climb the walls sometimes because they're like, oh, what's up here? Um,
mhm.
so right now I tend to just stick with bamboo reed fencing
Hmm.
and line that up. I just really like the look of it. Not fully naturalistic, but since I use grow tents, it's better than the reflective inside.
Yeah.
And otherwise, we just really tend to focus on the levels. So we literally build like abandoned burrows with a bunch of logs and driftwood. And then we pack dirt on top so that way they can have their own makeshift, like pre made burrows to hide in. And then we um, then that becomes the base layer, just the regular ground floor. And then we add just above ground hides on top of that, as well as stack more logs and branches and everything on top of each other. So they basically end up with like three different levels. And that's what I prefer over the backgrounds right now. I'd love to do better backgrounds, but we can't do that right now.
Yeah, I really do like Universal Rocks. Like Roy, I really like your enclosures. They look super super nice.
Thanks.
It's totally immersive. I love it. I
Hmm.
would love to get more Universal Rock stuff. I know I've been eyeing for the longest time their water bowls, but I know I'm gonna hate it,
Yeah.
like having to clean that. But they look so nice. And I do
Yeah.
have some backgrounds from Universal Rocks. None of the DIY
Hmm.
ones. I'm not. I didn't want to
Yeah.
do that. I went with the ledge ones. But I saw recently, who was it? I think it was Inquisitive Raptors. He got like it looks like a giant tree pod, but he put it in his
Hmm.
enclosure for his crocodile monitors, and he has a video of like the male sitting in there, and it is just the cutest thing ever. He's just chilling, and Universal Rocks does have like some products that are like fallen logs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, they
wish
do.
they
Yeah.
had more like fake branches because every time, like when I was doing these enclosures today, I put the branches and the plants in today, and my favorite branch finally completely broke, and
Mm.
and it would just like I love the real branches specifically, like especially the cork. I use it for the texture,
Yeah.
but it'd be really nice to have something that looks and feels the same basically, but doesn't decompose. So like,
Yeah, totally. I also, at the same time, though, I also like, this is like a total freaking rabbit hole, but I'm curious what y'all's thoughts are about this. But like, I, it's kind of funny because, um, I don't like plastic, like just generally, um, like, uh, I don't like the way it feels.
Texture.
Um, as like a neurodivergent person, like the texture of like synthetic fibers, like fabrics and stuff like that, I really don't like.
Bedtime.
And I also don't like it in my house. So like,
I don't like
there's not a
looking
lot
at
of
it.
plastic in my house. I also, yeah, and I also don't. It's true, I don't like looking at it. And if you like, my house is like very, everything's like pretty, I don't know, earthy textures and colors and materials for the most part. That's like just what I feel good around. And it's only in the herpetoculture world that I use a lot of plastic because it's like it's you need to be able to clean things easily, right? There's like a certain like element of that is hard to avoid, and like again, like Universal Rocks, it's like it's a plastic product, right? Ultimately, um, and like the PVC enclosures, they're made out of plastic, and it's like if you want to use like wood enclosures, you're gonna seal them with something that's basically plastic, and so it's like kind of like this inescapable thing. But I also like think about this is we're learning more and more about like the harmful side effects of being surrounded by so much plastic, right? Like microplastics and all this stuff, and how it messes with our hormones and like all kinds of stuff, right? And so I often wonder about that with our animals because like it's like our animals are living in these plastic boxes, a lot of the time. And I don't know if this is a relevant thing to even bring up, but I'm curious if it's something y'all ever even think about. I don't necessarily have any like uh fully formed thoughts about it, but it's just a thing.
It's honestly never occurred to me, but now that you've said it, I can tell you it's probably going to bother me at some point. So
Oh
I'm going
no.
to resist that thought for at least a little while until I can make disposable bungalows for my reptiles or something. But yeah, because I mean, like, I mean, if a material is sealed, it's sealed. But how much
Yeah.
is leaching off it? Like, if it's aquarium safe, like I feel like the poor fish are unfortunately the best playtest.
Mm.
I mean, maybe there's how many species of ocean fish or marine whatever that are living with literal plastic in the ocean.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know because like in that frame, like what is considered long term? Like
Yeah. Also, it's like, I mean, it seems like at this point, plastics are pretty much inescapable. They're in everything.
yeah,
They're
or
literally
if
like
it's not
everywhere again in
plastics,
our
it's something
bodies.
else.
It's like that's true of just everything. It's in soil. It's in like the food that we're eating.
Yeah, like I'm not happy about this
Um,
thought. Now this is going to
but
keep me up.
oh no. I just
Oh,
planted this little brain worm in there. I didn't mean to, but
yeah. Like I mean,
um,
like on. I've never really liked plastic or like the silk decor, like in general. Like
mm,
I've always liked the more naturalist stuff, but it's just like you're min maxing like the exposure at that point. Like it's still there, uh, in some way or another. I don't know what degree, so I can't speak to that. But let's assume there's some stable constant of plastic. Like I
mhm.
don't know what you do, what to do,
Yeah.
and like how to approach that thought. Like that's a very it's almost intrusive because it's just like there, it's looming. So I don't know. Like I mean, do you have you thought like put any real thought about like how to get around that, or is it just sitting in guilt every day? Like,
I don't know if I'd say I'm sitting in guilt about it, but I'm definitely just like, I just like don't like it. It's like again, it's just like one of those things that I'm like, yeah, it's a compromise, right? But
uh,
it's one of a billion compromises I have to make every day to
it's like
participate in the
Stockholm
world and be
syndrome.
alive. You know, I mean, I think that
Yeah,
it's just a compromise you have to make because
yeah,
I,
like
I, I I'm eventually going to be making my own enclosures for a lot of my stuff. I'll continue using the Tamura designs for the condos for like the rearing enclosures for the babies and stuff here. But for all my adults, I want to make my own enclosures, and some of them are going to be like these like kind of built-in things that are like shower stall sized, for the spilotes and stuff. But um, I know that I'm going to be mostly using wood, but I'm going to have to use plastics to like make them waterproof and be able to handle the humidity and everything. Um, and I'll be using universal rocks probably. So I think it's just something that you have to deal with and use. But I don't
Dean
know.
said his magnetic personality makes him super susceptible to being shocked, and that's why he doesn't like plastic.
Oh yeah.
You ever has anyone's reptile like just like I don't know like booped a door hinge in their enclosure and got shocked? Well,
I'm sure
Huh.
it's happened at least
Not that I've
once.
noticed.
that would not be a happy.
Occasionally my dog gets shocked and she's always just like like she's so sensitive that she like really doesn't like it. She's like, this was terrible. Why did this just happen?
Poor Dalma. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I've booped noses before and shocked my animals. I don't think I've done it to
Uh
a reptile. That's kind of frightening. It's such a small scale. But
yeah.
yeah, no, that's gonna be on my brain. Like, there's got to be like some organic method to keeping or something.
Someone
But
asked, are your tattoos magnetic?
no,
I don't know what this means.
yeah, no, I don't think so. They make going outside unbearable, but yeah, like having so much black, it just like absorbs so much sunlight.
Oh, interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've never
Yeah,
really thought
so
about that.
it's. I mean, if you have like really expensive tattoos like I do, you're not really supposed to like go out and just go tan. But so
Yeah.
like when I put like sunscreen on, yeah, I have to put like stronger strength stuff on my tattoo, and I'll usually like avoid having it just frying out in the sunlight. But anyway, yeah, but well, actually, I suppose they're magnetic because they are often a conversation starter. Um, yeah, it's I actually used to have like well, I still do have like really bad tattoos from when I was younger, and it just kind of like got to the point where people would look at it and they would try to guess what it is, and I just would just say, "Yeah, man, you nailed it." Like that's exactly it. Like, 'cause no one can tell what it is. Why have them? Well, I mean, we're not supposed to be talking about tattoos, but I got one the big tattoo I have now, the very hot one is a cover up of said bad tattoos,
Mm,
and I didn't consider that they would have that effect.
mm.
But I still love them anyway, so I'm happy with them, and I don't like going outside anyway. That's not going to change. But
Yeah.
hmm but yeah, I love them. We make sacrifices. It's like Roy having multiple sheds for different tools and stuff for his reptiles, or having or a theoretical person having multiple sheds for different phases of reptiles they really want to work with and are dedicating their time to. It's a sacrifice you make.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, but the long and short is either get a basement, a facility, or a shed in your set. That's what you need. And it's kind of funny too, like when people get like reptiles, I guess it's kind of different for someone that's getting their first reptile, and that'll most likely, I guess that's up for debate, but let's assume that'll be their only reptile. Like I
Hmm.
feel like one of the introductory topics should be more often how to quarantine your animal, how to have proper biosecurity, like what to look for in that crucial period when you have an already scared animal. Like you're basically like finding a needle in a haystack, observing for the line between stressed and abnormal behavior, right? Amaryllis,
And
maybe
another
you
thing,
speak on
yeah,
that.
absolutely. And another thing to add to that too is I get it. I mean, I was there too. Is people get very, it's a new animal. So, of course, we get very excited and want to interact and handle and work with the new animal because it's exciting. And unfortunately, it doesn't get talked about enough, like many other things. But that if we don't give them a proper acclimation period to get used to their new environment, it can actually cause a little bit of regression. It can make them more stressed. It can make them less likely to adjust as well because they're constantly being bombarded, depending, on what's going on. So I agree. We really do need to talk about quarantine a lot more and how even just the average keeper should quarantine or different tips, as well as speaking about how crucial the actual acclimation period is.
Hmm.
Um, in my opinion, that acclimation period, and this could even just be the animal arriving to a new home or the animal changing an enclosure. It's as simple as just the first few months of acclimating, getting used to something new. That's incredibly important. We need to give them time to adjust on their own, work through it on their own, process it on their own, and not have an external source bombarding them all the time. The only time I really, recommend bugging them, frequently is just to do like a little check to observe their behavior, see what they're doing, see how they're doing, preferably from a distance, especially if they run and hide. Or if they're sick, then yes, unfortunately, you do need to work with them more. Um, and that's where it gets tricky too,
Hmm.
is to not overwhelm them, but ensure they're still getting the medical care they need.
Would you
Hmm.
recommend cameras? That's kind of been my go-to.
Absolutely. I definitely wanted to get some, I need to get a lot more personally. But I wanted to get some however it's pronounced, cameras.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's primarily what I use. I wish you would have said something sooner because I just took like a bunch of extras and sent them off to someone. I would have sent some to you. I had
I'm
two
not in a
nannies
rush.
that I don't
We
own.
gotta move facilities first.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Don't have space for small camera.
Yeah,
We're truly at
all
capacity.
the electrical outlet use.
Oh no, that's fun though. I mean, well, not fun. It's definitely interesting too because like something that Roy said that never occurred to me, and it's kind of embarrassing to say so, is like when you're working with a species or planning to work with a species, doing the research and knowing like if they have a common occurrence of parasites or viruses, and then knowing to test for those very specific things because they're commonly occurring. But do you think there's a way I guess when it's behavioral, it's totally different. Like, because if you like looks, if someone's like, okay, I want to get a blue tongue skink, and they ask you Amaryllis, like, or Roy, like a rattlesnake, someone wants to get a rattlesnake or something, or Polycris, they're like, okay, like, how would you explain to them the difference between stressed behavior and sick behavior, or where it's
Mm.
declining rather than improving while operating in that window when you don't have before you reach the point of no return, if it's not already there. 'Cause, like,
Mhm.
I've received an animal before who showed signs that weren't totally irregular from a stressed animal from shipping, but she died like 24 hours later after I got her.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So it's like, and we had even gone to a vet too. So it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the biggest thing is their activity levels. Like even if they're scared and they're hiding a lot more, these animals will still tend to come out, peek out, look out, and just be observational of their surroundings to try and understand what's going on around them. And that tends to happen when it's really quiet. So having a camera is, a really good thing. But I also recommend weighing the animal if possible when you first get them,
that's like
and
the first thing
then
I do.
weighing every week or every other week just for, again, it varies. I would recommend longer if possible, but if it is like, okay, you might be pretty concerned, we might need to like really check in on your weight frequently, then that's where I'd recommend frequent weighing.
Mm.
um, and from there it lovely, lost my train of thought.
Weighing the animal to
Yeah,
establish a baseline. Because I think, like,
yeah,
I
so
think
weighing
there's
the
like a
animal, yep.
miniature consensus. It's like, what, 10% body fat, or not body fat, but weight loss within like a month period. Because they lose weight pretty slowly. They have slower metabolisms than like we do, right? Like,
Yeah.
but
Mm-hmm.
The most, like the biggest weight loss I was able to get was 15 grams a month for a blue tongue, and that was a lot. And that
Mm-hmm.
was still healthily doing activity and everything. Um, yeah, they typically weight loss is pretty slow.
yeah, it's challenging to.
I feel like, I mean, it's really hard to be able to assess for that kind of stuff unless you have an idea of like just again like
Baseline behavior.
healthy baseline behavior. Yeah, and so it's part of the reason why like I don't recommend people start with like a freshly imported wild caught animal of whatever species, right? It's because
Mhm.
like you're not you may not know if that animal is expressing aberrant or um, potentially ill behavior, you know,
Mm,
if you don't have prior experience or, just really solid general, experience. Cause there are, dozens of species that I have never kept that I'm still, I'm sure I'd still be able to tell if they weren't well, just because I've kept
Current
other species.
experience.
Right. And yeah, you just have like general experience on some level, but then there are also species specific behaviors too that might be more subtle, and like polychris are a great example of this, where they're pretty subtle lizards in general, and like they're very often it's very easy to tell if an imported polychris is sick, even if you're not experienced, just because they look awful. But then there are also subtle behaviors that they have, where they might be healthy for the most part, but they have like stress from like a con specific that they're housed with. Maybe there's some slight bullying, and they'll show those behaviors way more subtly than being if they were just like really really sick. And so it again all of that is just to say that having a good understanding of baseline healthy behavior from your animal is really helpful, but that's not always possible. Again, if you're working with something obscure and
There's even
you're
animals
kind of on
that
the cutting
I've worked
edge.
with that are, they appear healthy, they seem
Mm-hmm.
healthy, they were appearing to acclimate quite well for a few weeks, and then suddenly they just dropped dead.
mm,
And
Yeah.
during what I learned is when we did have to go through and do necropsies on those, is they went through just sudden organ failure. So there was so much
Mm-hmm.
stress, or there was chronic dehydration, was one we often worked with as well, just due to the import. And then that species was just more susceptible to dehydration for some reason. We don't know why yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just suddenly the kidney just stopped working, basically, is what it seemed like, even though they appeared normal and they may have had some minor symptoms, but they hide it so well that it's really hard to
Yeah.
tell with just about any reptile if they're sick until it's really, really obvious or too late.
And I find comfort in that too, because I'm the type of person where if things go wrong, I immediately question what I could have done differently. And there is a little bit of comfort in knowing that sometimes there's just things that are out of your control.
I mean, many reptiles can die just from stress alone.
Hmm.
It puts
Mhm.
so much on their heart, it puts so much on their organs that even sometimes if they just are in enough of a shutdown state, their bodies will just give up. So that one's more rare. That one's really, really rare.
Yeah, and it's
But
kind of too like, like sometimes you'll do a fecal exam and there's parasites detected, but it's in such a small number that it's not concerning, and say your vet like decides not not to treat it, or hypothetically if that vet had seen that fecal, they would say, okay, this doesn't need to be treated. But if you take that same animal and do something like ship it across the country, that stress can cause everything to just kind of tilt out of sync, and then
absolutely, absolutely, because
think-
stress
Yeah.
makes it worse. So when the animals are stressed, their immune systems drop, and then the bad illnesses, for lack of a better term, such broad spectrum, tends to be harder for them to fight off. Or all reptiles have a small amount of parasites in their systems naturally, it's just as part of their digestion. So those natural levels will commonly get just thrown out of proportion. And suddenly become a lot larger of a population because their bodies can't naturally keep it down.
uh, Speaking of stress, you said something in your webinar that I wanted to ask you. It's actually at the top of my list. I think you were discussing enrichment, or it might have been stress because it involves both. It was changing decor. You said to change things out in small numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So blue tongue skinks are incredibly observational. They are incredibly curious. Many folks have labeled them as lazy over the years, but I personally find that to be incredibly false. It's just if they get fed a large meal, food coma. If there's not enough enrichment or space going on, they're just going to lay there because there's nothing that they can do. But when they are granted enough space, enough clutter, they really tend to explore, investigate. I have skinks that will literally pace the enclosure, so I need to upgrade them soon. Absolutely, I'm excited for that. But based on their own behaviors, they really, really, really like to explore. And there was a study done on Australian blue tongue skinks, particularly it was either northerns or easterns, sister species, cousin species. Um, they can travel quite a few blocks. I forgot the exact radius of it, unfortunately, off the top of my head, but they do travel quite a few blocks and are a lot more um, active during breeding season, of course. So when it comes to completely resetting an enclosure, that's the equivalent of um, putting them into a new enclosure, basically. If you remove all the stuff that has their smell, all familiarity of that's their home, that's their territory is gone. If you just completely reset everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we recommend, just, swapping out items every now and then. So that way it's still a strong, this is my territory. I feel safe. I feel comfortable. This is my home. And then, oh, what's this? This is a new object. I get to see what that is. And it just helps keep them entertained, keeps their brains going. What we like to do is because once a week we go through and water our substrate and mix it up. We don't do we don't pull everything out, but we do like shift around the positioning of some things. So that way it's a very slight change in environment, but it's not like, oh, this is completely new and scary. It's still their home. It's just there's a slight change up, so it helps keep their brains entertained.
Mm.
Yeah. I asked specifically because I very frequently will rearrange entire enclosures. But it didn't kind of click in my head that I'm usually always using the same stuff or maybe a few items that are completely new.
Hmm.
But like I mean, with some animals, unless the animal is obviously very stressed, like I've done complete enclosure rearrange with the animal still in the enclosure, unless it was dangerous. Obviously, like I didn't want them to get hurt. But like even with I guess I was gonna ask if it was specific to blue tongues or if it was skinks or does it species by species, individual by individual? Because like when my Stokesai were babies, like I would rearrange the enclosure while while they were in there, and like you said, like the animals are very inquisitive, like and watching. Like it would start by them all like hiding, and
Hmm.
then they'd get curious while I was working, and then they started like watching. Then they started coming out, and then it turned into them getting little rides on rocks while I lifted them and moved them across the enclosure. So like,
Yeah,
so like
I'd
that would
say it's very
yeah.
individual. I do recommend that as like a base overall for just about all reptiles. Just because from my perspective, I could see a complete change out be similar to them just changing their new home entirely, which can cause an increase of stress. But there's also a lot of reptiles that just genuinely don't care and
Yeah.
genuinely don't have any stress responses. They're calm, they're trusting, they understand they're safe. So it really just depends on the individual animal. But because of how, I primarily work with wild caught species, so they really prefer that familiarity.
Hmm.
And we struggle a lot less with acclimation when it remains rather familiar. So that's just my recommendation based off of those more reactive animals. But of
Yeah.
course, there's always a large variety way you can do things, and especially when it's animal specific.
Yeah, actually, in terms of like scent, like because you said, like if you were to completely move them to another enclosure, that they would like smell it. It's kind of like wondering. For a moment, I wondered like how they'd react if, like, let's say you had animals in one enclosure, you moved them to an upgrade, and then you know starts the chain of upgrading other animals to the next thing. If you put like a skink, a Stokes eye, into one that previously had other Stokes eye, like a colony, how they react. Because I did at one point try to introduce what I thought was an additional female, but ended up being male and was singled out by my alpha male and was bullied, and I had to separate him.
Hmm.
But when I would interact with my skinks, especially the females, like because I hand feed them, there was a few times where I would stop at the colony enclosure, do my thing, and then go to him. Cause since he was by himself, I tried to spend a lot more time with him. But he actually would grab my hand and start doing the sexy hip wiggle. Would try to mate with my hand because it smelled like the females.
Yep,
So,
I see that with crested geckos all the time too.
but Roy, what about you? Do you do any kind of rearranging for the for the animals? I'm especially curious
Yeah.
about this with like the venomous ones. Like, do they get the same like enrichment?
Yeah.
Like, you
Oh
rearrange?
yeah, yeah. Pretty much everything's the same with the venomous, apart from just like I have, there's like venomous protocol, like where it's like I'm not gonna interact with that enclosure at all if I'm feeling off or like not on it, and I don't like rearrange things while the snakes are in there. They're getting moved into a
That sounds
bucket
like a bad
for
idea.
that. Um, Stuff like that. I also do use like gloves when I'm like cleaning out the enclosure at all, just because they do shed fangs and stuff like that, and you can
Really?
poke yourself on a fang. Yep. Um,
Hmm.
so there's like little protocols like that, but like I mean, again, it's species specific. There are some species that don't tolerate change very well, and there are others that really benefit from it. Actually, the rattlesnakes, they don't really love change that much. They're even like wild rattlesnakes. A lot of times, they have like very high sight fidelity, especially the females, where they will like they'll be within a 10-foot radius pretty much the whole year. Like very rarely leave that if they can get all their needs met within that area. Um, and so I don't rearrange their stuff too much. I do add leaf litter, like I'll add elements of enrichment, but I won't necessarily rearrange as much. But with most of the other species I keep, I do rearrange things periodically. Um, I'll also like prune plants, I'll replace plants, stuff like that. Usually the hardscape stuff, like the branches, and like the obviously like the rock backgrounds, those aren't going to be changing. But like the
Mm.
branches, I'll kind of leave unless they're decomposing and need to be replaced, that kind of thing. I do occasionally sometimes like rearrange like the core crowns and stuff, if I'm not liking the way that they've settled in the enclosures, that kind of thing. But um, yeah, I mean, I think that I feel like I'm kind of middle of the road in terms of like the rearranging thing. Um, it was something that I used to do more often when I had a smaller collection, just because I had more time. And honestly, I think it was enrichment for me as much as it was for the animals. The
That's probably
to
why I do
redesign.
it.
I think you can probably relate to that, Savannah. You
Stop putting
know,
thoughts in my head.
and um, but at this point, like I think that it's I just don't have as much spare time for that. It's also like a different stage of my life. Like I just don't have spare time at all right now. I'm like
I
trying to
can
build
also
our
agree it
house
being
and
very species specific.
yeah,
Some species definitely need that increased stimuli and
yep,
enrichment, while some just genuinely do not do well with change.
I feel
yeah,
like I've
I
heard
exactly.
of that about
fully
like
agree with that.
was it, do either of you know if it's true if it's like tarantulas or is it scorpions or something that like you cannot rearrange their enclosure like some just
Yeah,
will die. I don't
that
know anything
that
about it.
checks out for me. I mean,
I
a lot of
think it's
times
tarantulas.
I think it's tarantulas. Yeah, a lot of times tarantulas will like really have like really strong site fidelity. I was actually just when I was in Texas back in I guess it was June, end of May and beginning of June. I was there for like 10 days herping, and on the first night we went to this one spot, and um, I was with someone who knows that area really well, and he had seen this same tarantula every year at the same rock for 8 years, and he was like,
That's
"Let's go see if
cool.
she's there." And we went and checked, and she was there.
Oh,
That's
And
cool.
she just like sits at the edge, like right underneath this nice big flat rock, and every night she just sits there, and he's literally seen that tarantula multiple times a year every year for like the last 8 years.
That's awesome.
oh,
So
that's her home.
yeah, that's her home. She's got a little burrow under this rock, it goes down, and I think that that's true for a lot of tarantulas. They'll dig a burrow and then that's their spot,
Yeah.
especially the females. I think again, like the males are often more highly mobile. They have a really different. They're almost their life cycle is almost entirely different, But anyway,
That's super interesting.
I do want to bounce back to you, Savannah, where we were talking about the like stress and smelling of other skinks.
Hmm.
So, when people think of stress in reptiles, a lot of the times, most folks just typically go to fully negative. There are
Hmm.
actually positive, stressful
yeah,
situations, and that is actually a part of enrichment, where you provide those positive stressors. So, providing new objects for them to smell or investigate, that can be considered a positive stressor because it's something new, something they're not used to, might cause them some stress because they're uncomfortable and uncertain, but it helps them helps their brains work. It makes their brains think, and it helps them adjust and go, "Oh, this isn't a threat." And in my opinion, it helps them adjust a bit easier. Be less scared of everything. Um, so I have done that with some enclosures when I was like, I'll have tubs that I put skinks in temporarily to when I work things around. Um, I will occasionally use the same tub for like a small group of skinks just because of the way I have my quarantine cleaning and everything set up. I'm comfortable doing that. But that also allows them to sniff around the tubs, explore, investigate new smells. especially because, in the wild, they do have overlapping ranges and they do have some mild social behavior that has been studied. So it is good to have those, new stressors now and then, as long as it's not that overwhelming. Like you're not just putting them with another animal. Um, but, those new smells, including new smells from other animals, again, given it's all the proper quarantine procedures, everything's in place that you can comfortably just go from one animal to another. I find that that is good enrichment for them because they can investigate it. Though it also varies by animal. I have one skink that will just completely run away from everything because he's very shy and nervous of other skinks. So any sign of another skink, unless it's breeding season, he wants nothing to do and would rather run away. Another one I have, if he smells another skink, he immediately wants to find the skink, see if it's a female, and get to work. So it really does vary by the animal, how they respond. And I feel like that also helps with what you can do for enrichment. It provides more options, I feel, to an extent, with breeders, getting them used to things, but I certainly wouldn't recommend like frequent crossing with pet owners. But, just wanted to mention my observations with that.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. Life isn't always
Sunshines and rainbows.
exactly. And
Yeah, this is something I've talked about a lot in the past, but I think that like it's important to have some degree of stress, with our animals, to like not deprive them of that, because I think that we can actually impact their overall resilience, and obviously it's like within boundaries, and also it's kind of hard to even measure because like a lot of times when people are like in clinical contexts measuring stress, they're looking at cortisol levels, but cortisol is like also it's like it's arousal. It's not necessarily negative stress. It's just like activation.
Yep.
That can also be like you said, a positive thing. So, um, yeah, I think it's valuable. I'm glad you brought in that distinction.
yeah, it's less walking on eggshells. I think it's valuable, and like I can kind of
Mm-hmm.
like thinking back on it, like I have like my own examples, like when I kept an Aki monitor, like she was like I kind of became like her crutch, like she trusted me. So
Mm-hmm.
like I've got like one of those like cat not a hammock, it's like a fold down thing you put on your window. It was what my Tegu
Mm-hmm.
would lay on, and the Beardy, and they'd watch out the window, and I showed her to it, and she was terrified but intrigued and was clinging to my hand while looking out the window. Like
Mm-hmm.
so it's spooky, but she's like, I love it. It's not always that situation. Obviously, that's not always the outcome, and it's not always necessarily bad either, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. And speaking of stressors, I did have another question for you, Amaryllis. Just like and blue tongues in general, like, and bearing in mind I've never kept them, I don't know like anything about them. Uh, has anyone like ever like permanently cohabbed them or anything like that?
Yep.
Or because I've heard like some of their mating attempts can be brutal. That's the only thing I've heard.
Yeah, I actually had to retire one of my males this season because the female almost broke his jaw.
Ooh.
And last year, a breeder did have a female break a jaw on a male. A couple other times, limbs have been removed and even death. It can get really, really, really messy.
Mm.
Um, the primary issues those are caused by, though, is just not enough space. So if when it comes to blue tongue skinks, like I even did a deep dive. So shingleback blue tongue skinks are really the only like fully social blue tongue skink, and there was a lot of studies done on their actual social behavior. So none of the other blue tongues do this, but the females will literally initiate and make their male or mate follow them around for about 8 weeks prior to copulation. If they separate, the female tends to initiate and have them come back together again, and they just tend to stay together. But the reason why is due to gregarious behavior. So that way can keep an eye out on predators. So, more eyes the merrier. One can keep an eye out on predators while the other one eats, or they share food. And more often than not, the males have actually been found to run away when threats arrive, while the females sit there and defend themselves.
Oh,
And
okay.
so that is the only time that they're really together, is just that period before copulation. Then they copulate and then they separate. They'll interact, they can cross paths. They have small social interactions when they cross paths and interact with each other. But that is the most social behavior that we're aware of. In terms of other social behavior, many, many, many breeders have observed gregarious behavior within the babies and the mother. This is somewhere that gets argued about quite often. Folks will claim that you need to remove babies from mama immediately because mama will eat the babies. This is entirely false, in our opinion, because based off of multiple litters over a decade of breeding, many breeders have actually noticed maternal behavior from these females, where they will actually be rather defensive of the offspring. Even if you're completely far away from the female and you're on the other side of the enclosure messing with the baby, there's videos of that female running with her mouth open to be defensive. The only time I've personally seen them cannibalize their offspring is if they're sick or injured. So, that being said, there are breeders who have success. So, there's one breeder in Florida. Her name is Heather Moy at Fairy Tale Dragons LLC. I love what she does for her cohab breeding enclosures, because she's outside. She's able to have her enclosures outside, so they are very, very large, and I believe she's working on making them even larger. Typically, I'm not a fan of cohabitation at all. I'm completely against cohabitation. The only purpose for cohabitation is for breeding, or, another breeding purpose is the gregarious behavior between the offspring, between the babies during their first few weeks of life. As I've found, as well as many other breeders have found, they're actually a lot more social, curious, less fearful. But those are just anecdotal observations right now. We don't really know much other social behavior between the blue-tongued skinks. Aside from that, especially the Indonesians, because most studies are done on the Australian subspecies, there's incredibly lacking studies on the Indonesian subspecies. So as long as, I recommend a basis of just put 2 minimum sized enclosures together and then go a little bit bigger if you can. If not, even bigger. Or if you have a trio, put 3 enclosures together, if not bigger. That way, each one kind of has their own minimum space so they can escape each other. Because breeding is brutal, the important part is to just make sure there's enough space, enough resources that they don't have to fight. So multiple basking spots, multiple hiding spots, multiple food sources, or even feeding completely separately. There's a lot that has to go into play to reduce the risks as much as possible. Because other than breeding, there is absolutely no benefit to having blue-tongued skinks past a few weeks old.
I got you. Yeah.
So it varies, but I do agree with, even though I'm not a fan of cohabbing for breeding with blue-tongued skinks, that's just my preference. And I completely understand that there are species out there, and the way you have to work with them, you have to cohab to breed. But again, it's just the way the enclosures are set up.
Yeah.
So when people are cohabbing inside, that's what I'm typically against, just because they can't provide an enclosure that's larger than 8x4.
Right. Okay. Okay, Roy, it's your turn. Rattlesnakes aren't they? They're quite social. I've heard of them sharing dens.
Yeah, mine are together.
Oh,
They're
okay,
they they
cool. That
they
was
love
my
each
next
other.
question. If that was too precarious, or if you do it.
What's that?
I was wondering if having two, because you said like one of your protocols is like if you're
Oh
feeling
yeah, yeah.
off, you don't mess with them. I wasn't sure if it was like another like layer to that, if having two in one
I mean,
enclosure is too
it
distracting.
totally it totally is another layer for sure. But with these particular snakes, um, they're very mellow. This species of rattlesnake, just generally speaking, is usually quite mellow, and these individual snakes are quite mellow. It's never been an issue to be able to, interact with them, um, even in a cohabited environment. Eventually, I would actually like to move them outside into like a large outdoor
Make them a
enclosure,
den.
but yeah, and make them a den and everything. But I cohab a lot of the stuff that I work with. Again, most of this, but again, it's all species that tolerate each other well in that
Mhm.
respect, and that do have some sort of social aspect, or they're gregarious in some respects. Um, but I do think that for most species, the baseline should be single housing. And especially if you're a beginner to any
Mhm.
species, I feel like you should keep them alone initially to get to know them, and again establish those baseline parameters. Unless it's like a super social species like an Agurnia, that kind of thing.
Garter
Um,
snakes.
Well, I mean, yeah,
but
they live in like colonies, but like Amaryllis, I'm sure you've noticed this before too. Like there was a specific study on Cunningham skinks, and it was because people say like Agrania are monogamous, and that they're very reluctant to inbreed. And there was a study supporting that Cunningham's avoided inbreeding even when faced with like habitat destruction, but the Australian keepers report very differently.
mm,
And then another example is that Agrania in the wild live in decent sized colonies to large colonies, and then in captivity we struggled to keep more than 1.2. So it's definitely it's interesting to think about like how, and it kind of circles back to like Amaryllis's point is like if you are going to cohab, like you have to have like the space for it. And it's like
mhm,
Abronia are solitary, but they've been kept in groups successfully with breeding. But at the same time, like it's one of those scenarios where you have to like weigh the risk,
mhm,
and then it kind of comes down to like personal preference. And some people will I think the one of the more common scenarios to people cohabbing is convenience, and I think
mhm,
sometimes that's
Mhm.
fine. It, but you don't want to get like too nuanced. But
Yeah,
I
I
don't know.
just two of the references from the webinar earlier today is social structure and family structure in Agurnius Stokesy.
mhm,
Yeah, they're definitely interesting. Like especially like after the babies were born here, like if I came up to the enclosure and opened it to change their water, give them food, there are two openings, or there were two openings to their main cave, and mom would be at the front, dad would be at the back, like watching me, like watching. And I can't, I wasn't able to ever like decipher if mom ever like charged me. One time it looked like she might have charged me, but I was also offering her a bug, so she gets like really excited for them. But I don't know, like I like watching them, like it's kind of wholesome, like watching them, like not necessarily like parent, but like be protective.
Hmm.
and
mhm,
and like, and I've dealt with the good side and the bad side of like cohabitation, even colony species. Like with the Agurnia, it was like a nightmare when they were maturing, and my big male was singling out all the other males. Like it was one of the most stressful things I went through, because like one of my skinks almost lost a leg.
Hmm.
So it's, and then I've seen the good where I see the babies piled on top of dad or mom, or them uh, letting baby take food out of their mouth. Like it's like there's good sides and bad sides. You definitely have to be prepared for it, and that
Hmm.
I always try to keep at least one camera in enclosures I'm cohabbing in, just because if something does go wrong, like if I haven't seen one of them in a while, like I try to figure it out. But I don't know, like, but I do I didn't know, Roy, that you keep the rattlesnakes together, and I like that because um
Yeah, have you noticed if there's any difference in behavior keeping them together versus keeping them alone? Like, I'm just curious if there's like a slight variance and
Um,
points out some social behavior.
not that I've noticed with the rattlesnakes. I mean, they spend a lot of time together. Like they'll often be like coiled up together. Um,
That's so
like
cute.
piled up. They seem to, and I've observed this too, and with wild rattlesnakes, like they're often just like
Sharing body heat.
cuddling.
Hmm.
Yeah, they just cuddle. It's something that I've noticed in them for 20 years now.
It's something I struggle with
But
there is
yeah,
just seeing like, especially with more social species, it's hard for me to tell if it is a more social, laid back experience for all involved, or if
hmm
it's um, stealing resources from the other one, or
yeah,
some
yeah,
dominance
competition for
behavior.
resources.
Yeah, that.
Yeah,
So
like
I
this is the
do
best
kind of
spot.
struggle a little bit with trying to interpret which is which,
Yeah, yeah.
personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something that I was thinking about a lot when I was designing the big the big Guyana Shield biotope that I have with the spilotes in them, and I wanted to make sure that there was as little resource competition as possible, and so I made like three separate like basking platforms in that enclosure to see how the snakes would utilize them, and those snakes are funny because they often spend a lot of time together, but sometimes they do want to be alone. And like if one of them is like kind of climbing over another one and they're not in the mood for that, they'll like, they'll do the little like get off me
Oh,
kind of thing. Like, they'll like jerk their body in a way. It's like, hey, leave me alone. Um,
they have bad days too, I swear.
yeah, but then like the same two snakes, the next day will be like cuddling. They'll be like coiled up together, and they could totally like. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes they do. They'll bask in these separate zones. Um, but again, like that's only possible with a really large setup. That's like a
Yeah,
really big enclosure, and I definitely think that like that should be like if you are cohabitating, this is something that I've stressed in the past. You have to ensure that there's like a lot of redundancy in terms of the resources. There's more space. There's more options for thermoregulation, all those things.
I
And
agree.
even
That should
then,
be
it's still
standard.
complicated because, like you said, it's like, well, maybe there are two basking spots, but maybe one of them is just a little bit better, and
Yeah.
like that's imperceptible to us, but it's totally perceptible to them,
Hmm.
And so it's like who knows? But again, I think that the baseline should be solo housing, but for certain species, I think it actually be really enriching to keep them in cohabitation.
Hmm.
And like again, like that same setup, that Guyana Shield biotope, that's a mixed species display where there's a bunch of lizards that live with in there too, and it's like really awesome for those lizards because they have this huge space, right?
Hmm.
And they're not in competition with the snakes or with each other, and so it works out. But um, if there's different species of snake, it could be a disaster. They just eat all the lizards,
Hmm.
and so it just really depends on the species in question
Yeah.
and one's own knowledge of them and understanding of them.
And
I
it's
think
also very individual based too.
Yeah.
I've worked the species like the Peters. They're described as like a loose colony. Some of them genuinely do better in small groups with enough space. Some of them genuinely do better on their own. Uh, and I've noticed that with even garter snakes and
Mm.
some other species where there's just that one individual that it's like, oh, you're supposed to be a social species, yet you hate every one of your kind, want nothing to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
hmm,
So just that variance in behavior with their individual personalities, I personally find really unique.
Mm-hmm.
hmm, yeah. I don't know. I I think a lot of it's a there's a both a large overlap in species translatable and then individual behaviors to decipher. It's always, I think,
Absolutely.
they just like to keep you on your toes, I think.
Always.
Uh, but
Yeah.
so I guess we can get close to wrapping this up. But
Yeah.
I did have one last question for you, Amaryllis, based on the webinar. I was wondering, are there any behaviors you have seen exhibited that you think either represent something different or you don't know what it represents? Because I know you said, I think it was, uh, I don't remember if it was sneezing. There was something where you were like more like 9 times out of 10, they're doing this because this. Well, just it's safe to
Yeah.
assume this.
Sneezing.
Yeah. So, are there behaviors that you're beginning to see trend that you're trying to put together, or maybe you have suspicions about?
Honestly, not really. The sneezing is one. At this point, the things I'm more curious about is how they behave towards other skinks and social responses with other skinks. Because even though, in the wild they live very loosely, they don't cross paths that often, they still have some social structure based off of the successful cohabitation across the world with certain breeders. So I do personally feel there is some sort of social, I guess, behavior, hierarchy, something going on there. Um, right now, I know one I kind of consider is there's more dominant skinks and more submissive skinks. Um, I brought up an example of Hades, who just, as soon as he sees or smells another skink, he wants all up in their business to see if it's a lady. But if it's the other skink, he tends to be very shy, very submissive. He does the tail wags, trying to show, like, no, leave me alone. I don't want to hurt you. And he's more likely to run first than any of the other skinks.
Hmm.
So, that does make me interested in just further exploring their social behavior, as well as why some skinks are a lot more bold than others. Like, I don't know if that's a hormone thing, how they were raised. A friend of mine compared, her name's Samantha Steenson, she compared some of the behavior that we were describing in some of the scientific literature I found. She said it was kind of the way some submissive males react is kind of similar to how, like, chaser fish react, where the chasers are the males that are more submissive. They stay on the outside, and then try to come in to, sneak a lady, but not get involved or in a fight with the big male. So that's seen in subspecies. So she kind of related that a little bit. But I personally feel like there is a lot more to their communication that we still just haven't been able to touch up on yet, purely because of the limited studies on them, as well as, how shy they can be
Yeah.
in the wild.
And you couple that with how much it seems we're underestimating these animals.
And especially my concern always with cohabitating any animal is just the risks involved. Like, even if everything is proper, you have something huge, there's still always that risk of something going wrong, and I always overthink it.
I've been there every day. Okay, well, so then if people go back and watch your webinar, where's the best place for them to either share their experiences with you or ask you questions if they're looking for a one-on-one?
When it comes to asking questions, I really recommend the choice-based handling first, just because that really helps a lot, in my opinion. It their reptiles are incredibly intelligent, and we're learning that they're a lot more intelligent than initially led to believe. And focusing on choice-based handling for any reptile, just about any animal, in my opinion, I feel is where you're going to be the most successful. Just trying to work with the animals, gain their trust, get them used to you. Choice-based handling all the way. When it comes to questions, the common questions, those ones are questions we typically see repeated a lot. But aside from that, if there's people who have their own interpretations of certain behaviors, the sneezing one and the eye pinning were actually both brought up to me a couple months ago by other members, other keepers. Just, it's like, hey, I noticed this, but I'm not sure if I'm overthinking it or not. So I'm like, I'll look into that. I'll take some observations over the next few months and see. And sure enough, like, yeah, that's a little odd. We definitely need to look into that more. So if any, behavior and everything I feel is very subject to interpretation, at least to an extent. There's some that are obvious, like, yeah, that's obviously meaning this. But there's other ones, like the sneezing, or the eye pinning, that could have a large variety of interpretations. And that can really vary by the person, what they're seeing, their knowledge and experience of just behavior and language in general. But yeah.
Okay, excellent. I love that. I love collaborative communities. Okay,
So
Roy, is
always
there
helpful.
a name drop you want to do for yourself as usual?
I mean, you can find me at Wellspring Herp on Instagram, and my name Roy Arthur Blodgett on Facebook. I don't really like Facebook very much, so message me on Instagram. And yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in today and participating. We'll keep this rolling.
Yeah, excellent. All right, have a good night.
Bye, guys.